Hi everyone and welcome to Moonstone Makes. My name is Tommi. You can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as DynamiteTrujillo. Welcome to episode 113. Thank you so much for being here. If you're a new viewer, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, a big welcome back. Today is a nice, cold, and rainy Friday in February here on the Northern California coast where I'm coming to you from. And if you're interested in links to anything I talk about today, you can find show notes in the description box below. So, thank you for being here. How are you? I'm doing pretty good. We have a couple of make-alongs going right now. And the first one is the Fix It, Finish It, or Frog It make-along. Actually, it's the Finish It, Fix It, or Frog It make-along. And that's a make-along where you can participate by finishing something, a languishing whip, an UFO, if you will, or ripping it out if you decide you don't want to finish it, or by fixing a finished object, or ripping back and fixing a whip, or ripping out a finished object. And from there, you can make something with the frog yarn. You can also enter that into the giveaway. So how you enter and participate in the make-along is both or either through Instagram and or Ravelry. Instagram, you can use the hashtag FinFixFrog MAL, and all entries using that hashtag will be entered for a drawing. It doesn't matter if they're progress photos or finished photos or whatever. And then in Ravelry, there's a chatter thread where you can talk about what you're doing as you're doing it, and an FO thread where you can post pictures of the thing that you finished, the thing that you fixed, or the thing that you have frogged, or the thing that you've made with the frog yarn. So I have, by popular request, extended this make-along. There have been a lot of participants in this, and I think it's so cool. It makes me so happy to see people participating in this particular make-along because I'm a huge fan of ripping back and either fixing things or frogging them and reusing the yarn, as you will see later, because I have participated more in this make-along since my last episode. So, at the request of quite a few people, I am extending it. Originally, it was supposed to run through until the end of March, but now it is going to run through until the end of April. So an extra month. And yeah, are you participating? What are you doing? I'd love to hear about it. So join in on Instagram and Ravelry if you would like. The next one that we're running is a year-long make-along, running all of 2021. And it's going to be broken up into sections by season because it's the seasons make along, and that one has the hashtag on Instagram, seasons MAL 2021. You can also participate the same way on Ravelry with a chatter thread and an FO thread, and there's going to be a new FO thread for every season of the year. And you can participate in this one by making something that is how you interpret the season, or however the season that you're currently in inspires you, be it the weather or what you do during that season in that time of year in that part of your life, the holiday that's in that season, birthdays that are in that season, you know, anything anything really, anything goes. And then also you know, the northern and the southern hemispheres seasons are different. So to participate, it's whatever season that you are currently in, wherever you are. And, you know, seasons are different everywhere too. Like, I am currently in winter here in February in California, but my winter is so much different than like a New York winter or somewhere else on the East Coast or somewhere else in a different part of the world. So yeah, it's pretty open to interpretation. Whatever it means to you, go for it. And those are our make-alongs that are happening right now, and I'm very excited about them. I like them very much. So we are going to move on to what I'm wearing. I am wearing my Mazzy cardigan, which I wear a lot because it's one of my very favorite cardigans that I've made. I knit this Mazzy cardigan, which is a pattern by Elizabeth Smith out of Harrisville Designs Nightshades in the Insomnia colorway. And Nightshades is a woolen spun Cormo non-superwash yarn, and it's absolutely beautiful. I really love Harrisville Designs as a company, and I love their yarn. I've used it a few times, and it's just beautiful. So the Insomnia is the black with greenish running through it, and I just love it. I would 100% knit with this yarn again in a different shade for a different sweater. I really love this yarn. Okay, so let's move on to what I have finished. I have one finished object, and it is the Lumi Socks. This is a pattern by Fiber Tales, who is Lerica of the Fiber Tales podcast. She designs beautiful, beautiful patterns, and this is one of her designs. It's a bulky weight slipper pattern or sock pattern. And so I finished it. I used my hand spun. And if you can see, this is kind of the nature of hand spun. They're both pretty different. This one's a lot darker and brighter and more neon. And this one's a little more muted, a little more pastel. And I wonder if I have the leftover yarn somewhere. Oh, I do. Okay, I'll be right back. So here's what I have left. This is the yarn I used. Like I said, it's my hand spun. I spun this on my Shocked Ladybug wheel, which is the only wheel I have. And the fiber is a combination of spun right round and Julie spins. What I did is I took some spun right round fiber, a 4-ounce braid, in the Lulu colorway, and it's Rambouillet, and I spun that for one ply. And for the other ply, I took some Julie Spins Falkland in the Princess colorway and did that for the second ply and then plied them together. So the Rambouillet ply is the really bright kind of neon ply with all the different colors in it. And then the Falkland ply is much more muted. It pretty much only has like soft pinks, lavenders, grays, and whites in it. So this is what I had left. I started out with 2 skeins, which was 250 grams, and the pattern calls for 200 grams of the bulky weight Alaphos Lopi yarn. And I used 1 skein plus probably a few yards from the skein. And I finished my 1 skein with only having a tiny bit left to do on the toe. So what I did, I had to break into the second skein, but I didn't want to cake it all up and just use a teeny bit. So I put this skein on my Swift and I opened it up and I just knit straight from the open Swift for the rest of my sock. It was just like a few rows on the toe. And then I tied it back up and re-skeined it. So I still have a bunch of this left over. And this pattern is top down and it's constructed like a pretty typical sock. You cast on at the top and then do a Latvian braid. And this was my first time doing a Latvian braid. She has you use a contrast color so that it's alternating colors. The contrast yarn that I used was some bulky weight knit picks. I believe it's Wool of the Andes bulky in just the natural cream white color. I don't know what the colorway is. It might have a colorway name and it might not. But that's what I used. And my hand spun was definitely loftier than that yarn. So it definitely, you know, if you look closely at it, I feel like it looks a little funky. And I was a little concerned about that in my last episode when I only had 1 done. But I think it turned out totally fine. So there's a Latvian braid. And then you go into stockinette. You do some decreases. She gives you a place in the pattern where she recommends lengthening it if you want to lengthen the leg, and that was right here. So I did add a few rows, I think probably like 4 or 5 rounds, and I just tried it on to see like where this calf increase fit my calf the best, and I knit from there. And the heel is a heel flap and gusset without a slip stitch. And it's got a wedge-ish toe. I never know the difference between all the toes. It's like kind of pretty typical standard toe. And I had to knit it a few times. I do have those little holes right there, just kind of laddery things from my decreases. And I'm not too concerned about them. I'm not worried about it. But I did have to redo the toe on this first one a few times because I knit the foot to the like length that she specified and then did the toe, and it was just not roomy enough for me. So I ripped it out and redid it with like 2 more rounds, and it still wasn't good enough. So at that point I knit the second sock and did it with like a couple more rounds, and then it was perfect. Since the whole sock is pretty loose, I did the smallest size, but it's all pretty, I mean, they're slippery, they're pretty loose. So I wanted the length in the foot to be a little looser as well. The way that it was written and how it fit on my foot, it was pretty, it fit, but it was just a little snug, which felt weird having a snug length and a loose width all up and down. So I just wanted a little more roominess in the toe. So I redid the first toe a few times, and that is where this kind of color contrast comes in. So the blue would have extended down the whole toe if I had done it from the original skein. But this little bit that I used off of this one is the pink and purple at the end. So I really love how they came out. They do have a nice loose fit. They feel really good. I've worn them once, and they're slippers, so they're house socks. I'm only wearing them around the house. And these days, I spend a lot of time just walking around my house in socks. So I wore these once, and I wore them the whole day, and they were great. They did kind of slouch down a lot over time, and I think that's because there's so much room in the calf here that they ended up just kind of like bellowing down a little bit, which was fine. It's just kind of the nature of the shape. And yeah, I really, really like them. I am definitely tempted to make more bulky weight, kind of looser fitting slipper socks for myself, maybe without the calf increase. And so I think I might kind of follow this pattern-ish a little bit again for some other bulky weight socks, and maybe just start out with a smaller cast on, maybe do some ribbing, and just following the rest of it for the stitch counts and stuff, because that worked out really well for my foot. And I also did a little loop at the top here. So what she calls for is when you cast on, you have a few ends here that she wants you to leave long so that you can do something with. So you have your cast on tail, and then you have your 2 ends from the white yarn or from the contrast yarn. And she has you leave those pretty long until the end. And what she has you do, I think, is just braid them and then either tie them off or do like maybe a little tassel or something at the end, and it's supposed to just hang down. But I decided to braid them and then just do a little loop. So I just braided it for a little bit and then kind of sewed the end in and wove it into my ends here. And I like it. I think that's kind of cool. So I love them. Again, these are the Lumi Socks by Fiber Tales, and it's a bulky weight slipper pattern. And they're wonderful. So that's all I finished. I was kind of hoping to have a couple more things finished this episode just because I want the things, but I don't. And I did cast on something new. So let's show you all that now. By the way, I'm wearing this really gaudy necklace today, which looks like that. And I love this necklace, but I don't wear it that often because it is very gaudy and very costumey. But it's a necklace that I bought for myself that I had intended to wear at my wedding with my wedding dress. I didn't end up wearing it though because I ended up getting given a necklace, like gifted a necklace to wear at my wedding. So I wore that instead because it was the nice thing to do. But this is the necklace that I had intended to wear with my wedding dress. And I bought it at Elvira Street, which is a place in Los Angeles. And it's essentially a big block, and it's a big Mexican market. And there's shops there, and there are restaurants there, and you can get the best taquitos I've ever had in my life there. And I really, when I lived in Los Angeles, which it's been maybe 15 years-ish since I've lived in Northern California, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and it was one of mine and my family's favorite places to go. And I loved that you can get stuff like this at Elvira Street. And so this is like made out of like some kind of citrus peels that have been dried, like shaped and dried, and then there's wooden beads on it and these little danglies. And I love this necklace so much. And like I said, I don't wear it that often. It was supposed to be just like kind of a costumey wedding thing. But I decided to throw it on today because I think it looks really good with black. So that's my orange peel jewelry for today. My first work in progress is the Eliza sweater. It is living in my Woodsy and Wild crow bag. This is a pattern by Maria Monska, who has the Stitched in Sweden podcast, and I am really, really far on this. So this is a kid-sized sweater, and here's what I have so far. It's an all-over brioche pattern, and it's a top-down, drop-shoulder pullover, pretty much. And I'm making it for my daughter Lucy. I'm making the second size, which is the 2 to 3 year size, I think. And it fits her really great so far. So the yarns that I'm using are 4 different yarns, and I'm marling them all together. They're all fingering weight yarns. The pattern calls for either holding fingering weight double or using a DK. And in the sample, she just holds 2 of the same yarn, the same fingering yarn together to create a DK gauge. But I've decided to marl because that's what I do. I love marling. So kind of my main color, and I had a full skein of this, is this. It's Malabrigo Sock in the Rayon Vert colorway, I think. Yeah, I lost the tag, but it's the Rayon Vert colorway. It's very pretty. And I got this at my local yarn shop called Yarn, which is in Eureka, California. My next kind of, I would say, second main color is this one. This is Junebug Fibers. And this is like a silk merino blend, I think. And this one I do have the tag for. It's in the Amethyst Hour colorway, so it's 80 superwash merino, 20 silk. And it's a fingering. And then I've got this, which is Handmaiden Fine Yarns in the, I don't know, I forgot. I don't have any of the information for this. This was a club colorway from the Loopy U, like probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I've used this in a few different projects, and these are my leftovers. But Handmaiden is the company. It's got like, I think silk and cashmere and wool or something like that in it. And the colorway is something like early morning, dawn, dusk, something. It's in my project notes on Ravelry. So if you click the link below, that's where you can find more information about this yarn. But it's a fingering weight. It's another luxury yarn. It's really nice. And then the last one that I'm using is this, another long time scrap from my scrap stash. This is some Madeline Tosh. Tosh Mo Light is the base, and it's a single ply fingering weight wool and mohair blend. I believe the colorway is high-low, but I could be wrong. I don't know at all. But it's like pinks and peaches and creams with pretty much gray speckles. So that's what I'm using. And I'm just doing stripes, holding 2 different colorways together at all times. And this stripe right here is kind of my main color, and that's these 2 yarns held together, the Malabrigo and the Junebug. So I've gotten the whole body done. I'm on the sleeve, and I'm going. I'm so almost done with this. It's gonna be done really soon. It is brioche, so it goes by a little more slowly than just some other kind of straight up knit stitch, because with brioche, essentially what you're doing is you're knitting each round twice. So it grows a little slowly, but it's fine. I love doing brioche. I think it's so much fun, especially when you're changing colors like this and marling them. Oh, I love it. So I did the body on the needle size called for, which is a US size 7. And I tried switching on the sleeves to my short circulars to do them in the round. And these sleeves were just a little too small and it was getting annoying and it was not that comfortable. And I really wanted to try doing it because I felt like, well, knitting brioche in the round is way easier for me than knitting brioche magic loop, because when you're, those last stitches on each side can get a little tricky, like with the yarn crossovers, like those yarn over stitches. So in the round was way easier in that regard, but it was just annoying and didn't feel good on my hands just because these sleeves are just so tiny. So I switched to magic loop. And I did have a few rounds where I ended up with like some extra stitches that weren't real stitches because I did my yarn overs wrong at the end. But I had eventually figured it out. I'm in the groove now, and now it's going fine. I'm using my Haya interchangeable sharps, Haya sharps. And so the body's completely done. It's just got plain ribbing on the bottom. And then once I do both the sleeves, I'll just go back and pick up for the neckband and do some ribbing there. I did accidentally cast on too many stitches at the neck right here. So the body is a little teeny bit wider than it's supposed to be, but I actually think that's totally fine. I figured that out really early on and decided not to fix it because Lucy is 2.5 and I'm knitting the 2 to 3 year size, and I figured that was fine. I went based on the measurements, and it stretches a lot, so I wasn't worried about it like getting too small too soon. But having those couple extra stitches in there, I feel like is some pretty good security in that on that end. Also, I think I knitted a little bit longer than the pattern called for because she's also very tall. She's very skinny but very tall. So yeah, I think it's gonna work out really, really good. And like I said, I've tried it on her. It fits great. She loves purple. She wanted a purple sweater, so I picked all of my purplish with some pinks yarns for her. So I hope she likes it when it's done. You never know. You never know with little kids. She might hate it. She might not want to wear it. And that's okay. If that's the case, it's okay. It was fun to knit, but I hope she likes it. And this pattern comes in a pretty good range of sizes. Like I said, I'm knitting the second size, so it comes in one size smaller than that for more of a baby size. But then it goes up to like actual little kid sizes, like beyond toddler sizes. And I don't know offhand how big it goes, but I want to say even like up to like 10 years old or something like that, possibly. But I love it. If you have a kid to knit for and you like brioche or you're interested in brioche, definitely check it out. I am kind of experienced with brioche. I've knit quite a few brioche patterns in the past, and I'm really comfortable with the whole brioche stitch and setup and all that. So I can't quite speak to the brioche beginner friendliness of the pattern because it said what to do and I was like, yeah, that's what I do. And I didn't have any trouble with it, but you know, that's kind of how it is with a lot of brioche patterns is you read it, and if you, like for me, when I was first doing brioche, I would read the pattern, and if I really didn't know what it was talking about with its like specific brioche stitches, I would just go on YouTube and find a tutorial. So it's a really great pattern. It's written really well. Everything's been really clear so far. I really love her, I think it's the decreases. She has some decreases that are much more simple than regular brioche decreases. So with regular brioche decreases and maybe increases, I can't remember, there's kind of a complicated like back and forth way to do it to make it really nice. And that's usually what a brioche pattern calls for when you increase or decrease, but there are some decreases, I think it's decreases, on this pattern where it's a lot more simple and a lot more just like on the plane of like knit two together-ish kind of thing. And they look really great and they're so much more simple. So I really appreciated that because there were a lot of those like during certain whole slopes of the shaping. And it was really nice to just do this really simple decrease rather than having to like remember how to do that really complicated decrease every time. So I loved that. And yeah, I definitely recommend that pattern if you're into it. Totally check it out. What's next? What is in here? This is my new cast on. I'm so excited about this project. So check it out. I'm knitting a scarf. This is my scarf so far. This pattern is called the Stash Dive Scarf, and it's by Summer Lee, whose patterns I am getting kind of into right now. She's mostly a sock designer, and I really want to buy one of her bundles. She sells most of her sock designs in bundles. So you buy one pattern download and you get like 3 different sock patterns, I think usually. And they're all kind of themed and I really like them. So I think I might be knitting some of her colorwork socks soon, but I'm not sure. We'll see. So one of her patterns, and this is a free pattern, is called the Stash Dive Scarf. It's one of her more recent patterns. I also discovered that she has a YouTube channel, so I've gone back and watched all of her podcast episodes, which I really like. And one of the videos that she has is about this pattern. It's pretty much a tutorial for this free pattern. And I just kind of watched it because I was like in the midst of watching her videos and I was like, let's check it out. And so she just kind of walks you through the pattern. It's really simple and really basic, and she gives you like tips and stuff on how to do it the way she does it. And after I watched that video, which I wasn't planning on making this thing, I just was watching the video for fun, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go make it. So here it is. It is so much fun. So what it is a scarf in the round. You cast on your stitches, you knit and knit and knit in the round. She calls for a size US 10 needle while using 2 strands of yarn marled together the whole way, and for each stripe you change both strands is, you know, the recommended thing. And you hold 1 strand of worsted weight yarn with 1 strand of fingering weight yarn. And the idea is to use all your worsted and fingering weight scraps up together into one beautiful scarf. And it's perfect for me because I have so many scraps and like almost all of them are worsted and fingering. Some of them are DK, some of them are lace, some of them are like weird heavy fingerings. So it's really great because what I'm doing is it's like mostly worsted and fingering, but I have the DKs that I'm using, I'm pairing with like a sport weight or a heavier fingering, and the errands that I have, I'm pairing with like a light fingering or a lace weight. It's really versatile and it's really great, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So I've got, what is that, like 6 stripes so far? And this is so far all the yarn I've picked out for it. And I'm probably gonna need more than this. But I've kind of like paired them all together into like how I want them to be. And of course, after I did that, I threw them all into my bag and now I've got them all mixed up. But let's just kind of go through a quick rundown of what I have in here. These are all leftovers and stuff. So this is Swan's Island Natural Colors. This is a worsted weight, naturally dyed yarn. This, I forget what this is. It's a very old skein of hand-dyed yarn that I won from Laura from Jinx Yarns when she had a podcast. It's Dharma Dyeworks, I think. But I remember too that they went out of business, so you can't get that anyway. This is Murray & Co. Wool Goods. I knit some socks with this. This is fingering. The stripe that I'm on right now, I'm using these 2. This is some Machete Shop, and then this is some handspun. And the handspun is a little bit of a heavier fingering weight, and then this is DK. So the handspun is like a bamboo merino blend, I want to say. And I really like this. I had like a 1 ounce little bat of it that my coworker actually gave me several years ago when I house sat for her. Well, I didn't house sit, I pet sat. She went out of town for a weekend and I went over to her house and fed her pets every day while she was gone. And so when she came back, she gave me this and another like coordinating bat of spinning fiber, which was the bamboo and wool. And her mother-in-law, well, her father-in-law's girlfriend used to be a local fiber dyer where I live. And she was very into like, I think mostly felting, like felting arts, and she would teach classes and stuff. And unfortunately, I never met her. She ended up moving away to the East Coast where she's from. But she dyed this fiber and my coworker gave it to me as a gift, and I spun it up and have had this hand spun in my stash for a pretty long time. And the current stripe that I'm on, and I totally lied, it's not with this. The current stripe that I'm on is this hand spun with this, and this is a heavier fingering weight yarn, and I can't remember what this is, but this is a hand dyed non-superwash wool that I was given in a swap a really long time ago. So that's what this stripe is looking like. I really like it. And then the one below it was this, which is Jinx yarn. And this is a very precious leftover because it's all I have of Jinx, and Jinx no longer dyes. And this is a worsted weight in the Bus Stop colorway, which was a Totoro reference. And then, let's see, some of my other worsteds are, I guess these are the only ones I have out right now. I don't know. I went through a lot of stuff. This is some Harrisville Designs Highland. And then this is Alchemy Yarns. And this is a super fuzzy, like, it's called an Aran weight, but it's kind of more like a DK. And this is like silk and mohair, I think. I won this from another local yarn shop probably like 10 years ago, and I've never used it. This is the whole skein. And then I've got this, which is the Fiber Co. And this was left over from a shawl I made a long time ago. And it's got like flax and linen and wool in it. I don't know what the base is, but this is a fingering weight, or like a heavy lace. This is another heavy fingering, which is the same as this dyer. And this is some very old, this was one of the first like hand-dyed skeins of yarn I ever bought. And this is some Tosh Merino Light. I think it's the Twig colorway. And that's kind of it. That's kind of like the whole pile of what I've chosen to go into the scarf so far. And like I said, I did pair everything and I was very happy with all my pairings, and then I stupidly mixed them all up and I have no idea what goes with what anymore. So I'm just kind of choosing randomly. And I do have to cake up all of these that are in little skeins, but man, I'm enjoying this so much. I'm super in love with it. It's really fun. This kind of ticks all my boxes for me of things that I love. I love marling a lot. I love using up scraps. I love just plain straight up knitting with nothing complicated. And it's really fun, and it's going by really fast because you're creating such a bulky fabric on big needles that it's just flying, and it's so much fun. And it's really satisfying to see each stripe get created and to see how it looks with the rest of the scarf as you go. I did modify the pattern a little bit. She calls for you to cast on a certain number of stitches using like a long tail cast on or something like that, and then just going. And then what you're supposed to do is once you're all done, when you finish the scarf, hold on, let me go back. Once you're all done knitting, you turn the whole scarf inside out, and you're supposed to do just like sew up the cast on edge from the inside. And then you flip it right side out, and that's just like sewn from the inside. And then the other end where your needles still are, you do Kitchener. And I decided that I didn't want to sew from the inside, so I did a provisional cast on instead of a regular cast on. And at the end, when I'm done, I'll Kitchener my working yarn, and then I'll go back and pick up these stitches and Kitchener this cast on edge as well. So I did the kind of provisional cast on where you use just a crochet hook and you do a bunch of slip stitches, and then you go back in and you pick up all the little back bumps on those slip stitches with your needle and with your working yarn, and then knit from there. So that's what I did. And I'm very happy with my decision. I think I'm very smart. And yeah, that's pretty much the whole pattern is you knit and then you close up the two ends and that's your scarf. I think you're supposed to knit about 6 feet and I'll probably knit about that length or until I run out of yarn or whenever I feel like it's done. And then I feel like I'm probably going to end up adding fringe. Like I can't really imagine a really long scarf without fringe. I don't know why. It feels like it needs fringe to me, but we'll see when it's all done how I feel. I don't know, but I'm pretty, like it's gonna need fringe, right? Like I think it's gonna need some fringe. We'll see. But I'm in love with this pattern. It's great. I don't know why I wouldn't knit this, and if I think you maybe should knit it too. I don't know. Do you want to knit it? I think you should knit it. It's so fun. It's so fun. And it uses up what you already have, or you can use new yarn too, whatever. I also thought about like how it might be cool to do a version with just a few skeins of yarn where you repeat the stripes, you know, so it's a repeating color pattern. I thought that would be really neat too. I love it. I'm super into this pattern. So that is my new cast on. My last work in progress is my Oxbow cardigan. I have been working on this and I have gotten pretty dang far, and I'm really stoked on that fact. So here's what I have so far. So the Oxbow is a cardigan by Andrea Mowry. It's worked from the bottom up in this all over texture pattern. And I have gotten to the point where I've knit completely on the body. I've attached the sleeves, which you also knit bottom up before you knit the body. So I've got the sleeves attached, and I am about 1.5 inches or so above the sleeve join. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm doing the raglan decreases, and the pattern is one of these things where you're doing 2 different sets of decreases at the same time. So I'm doing the raglan decreases right now, but also I'm doing the neck shaping right now. So that just started a little while ago. So I've got 2 different rates of decreases happening in 2 different spots with 2 different styles of decreases. And that can be pretty tricky to manage, but I'm managing it pretty well so far. I'm pretty happy with my method, and I think it's going really good. So what I'm doing to manage my at the same time decreases is I have 2 different row counters going, because one of the sets of decreases happens every like 5 rounds and the other set happens like every 4 rounds, or rows. I'm working flat, it's rows. So I've got 2 different counters going, and I'm just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 over here, and switching them every single row. And I figured out how many decreases I needed to do total before I started. And what I did is I got out stitch markers to correspond with those decreases with the total amount of decreases that I would need to do. So like for the raglan decreases, I think I needed like 5. I needed to do like 5 decreases total. So I got 5 stitch markers, and once I use all those 5, I know I'm done. So every time I do a decrease, I put on a stitch marker. Here's 2, I've done 2 already. I've got 3 more here. And once I'm done, once I've used all these, I should be at the stitch count that I'm supposed to have. And the same for the neck shaping. So this is a shawl collar, an open cardigan with a shawl collar. So like this one is an open cardigan, but the collar just goes straight down. But with the Oxbow, it kind of goes in more like a V. So I'm doing decreases up here to have it go in a little bit. And I've got all my stitch markers here on every decrease that I've done. And for that, I have these here. I'm using the little bulb ones for these decreases, and I have 4 more to go. So that's my plan. That's my method for managing my at the same time different decreases. And I think it's gonna work out really great. Once I'm done using all my stitch markers, I should be at the correct stitch count, but you know, I'm counting as I go along too, just to make sure that I haven't messed anything up. I did mess up my stitch count when I attached the sleeves. And I don't know if you remember this or not from a few episodes ago when I finished this cardigan. I did the same thing and I finally figured out why. So when you attach the sleeves on a bottom-up sweater, you have your sleeves knit separately, and then the top of the sleeve is on waste yarn, so those stitches are live. You knit up the body, and then you bind off some stitches, and then on your next round or row or whatever, you knit across the body, and then you knit across your arm stitches, and then you keep going and do the same thing to attach the other arm. And then after you do that, she gives you a stitch count of what you should have for your fronts, your arms, and your body, your back. So I was off one stitch after I did that, just like I was with this sweater. So my back had the correct number of stitches, and one side, one front panel, had one too many stitches, and one had one too little stitches, or something like that. But it worked out perfectly to where I knew what happened is just everything got shifted over one stitch. And I was like, how did that happen again? Because that happened on this sweater, but by the time I noticed it on this sweater, because I didn't count right away, I was too far up my raglan decreases, and I was like, I'm not fixing it. And so I just did like a knit two together over here and make one over here. And it's fine, you can't tell on this. But I figured it out right away on this one. And so I was like, I need to just fix it. So I pulled back a row and I realized where I went wrong. So when you're knitting across a row and you're binding off stitches, she has you knit a certain number of stitches, and then once you have a certain number of stitches over here, you bind off a certain amount of stitches. And when I'm binding off in that style, the bind off that I use is like knit one, slip one over, knit one, slip one over, right? Well, when I get to the point where she says, okay, start binding off here, what I did is I just started slipping one, and then I knit one and I slipped another one, and I bound off my number of stitches. Whereas what I should be doing is once I get to the point where I need to start binding off, knit one and then slip it. So that's what I did. It was just like a super simple, like, little error that I didn't even like think about. Like, I don't know, it was just a really simple, teeny mistake, but it made me off one stitch the whole row. So I went back in and fixed it, and I figured it out, and now whenever I need to do a bottom-up sweater where I cast off stitches and attach sleeves, I will never be off one stitch again because I figured it out and know how to do it now. Anyway, that was a huge revelation. So I'm very happy I fixed it on this one. Now all the stitch counts are correct. And yeah, this is a really great sweater so far. I am using a US size 11, which is what the pattern calls for. I did do a gauge swatch and got gauge, and that is wonderful. I think I did maybe an extra ½ an inch on the length, just because that's where my pattern repeat fell. And so I like things a little longer anyway, so I was pretty happy with that. And I think I also lengthened the arms a teeny bit, because I like sleeves to, like, these are a little too short for me. I would like it if they came down a little more, like right there. So all I have to do are the raglan decreases, and then I'll have to do the shawl collar. I have this much yarn left, and I think I'm gonna have enough, but I am cutting it pretty close in terms of the yardage numbers that were called for in the pattern. And I knew that going into it, so worst case scenario, I'll have to buy one more skein. And I never told you what yarn this was. Sorry. Hi. This is Brooklyn Tweed Quarry, and that is Brooklyn Tweed's bulky weight yarn. It's 100% non-superwash wool. It's woolen spun, and it is a 3-ply, but it's a very, very loose 3-ply. So this is considered to be a pretty fragile yarn. It's like hardly plied at all. It's just like 3 strands that are just kind of... It's considered to be a very fragile yarn, and it is. Like if I pulled this apart, it would just pull apart really easily. Just like a lot of Brooklyn Tweed's woolen spun yarns are. But I've been very happy and very surprised with how well this yarn has stood up to knitting, ripping, and knitting again. Because this isn't the first sweater I've made with this yarn. I knit the Ambrosia cardigan with this yarn. Had that around for a while. Wore it sometimes, but not a whole lot. And then I ripped it out. And it stood up so well to being ripped out. It just like was totally fine. And I balled it up and it was fine. And then I immediately cast it on into this sweater. And it's been fine to work with. I haven't had any problems with it breaking or ripping or being too fragile or coming apart or anything. So I'm really, really happy with this yarn, even though it is technically like a pretty fragile yarn, and it has a reputation for being really fragile and really pilly, but I've been super happy with it. And I think it's working up really nicely, and I'm super impressed with how it ripped out and got reknit. And when I ripped it out, I left all of my spit splices in, so when I originally knit this yarn into that other cardigan, to join my yarn, I just used spit splices, which is my favorite way of joining new balls of yarn to old balls of yarn when I'm using non-superwash yarn. And so I just left all those in when I came across them. And it's great because now I'm like hardly joining any yarn. So that is my Oxbow. I'm very happy with it. And I'm very excited for it to be done. Because I can't wait to wear it. And that is everything I've been working on. Those are my 3 whips, my exciting new cast on, and my 1 FO. For my favorites this week, I'm going to be talking about a sweater that I ripped out for my Finish It, Fix It, or Frog It make along, and what I'm going to do with the yarn next. So, the yarn that I frogged is in this Fat Squirrel project bag, and it might be surprising to know that I ripped out my spiral sweater. Now the spiral sweater is a sweater that I crocheted. It was my very first crochet sweater. And it was really beautiful and I really loved it. And I've worn it a few times on the podcast, and every time I wore it, I talked about how much I loved it. So why did I rip it out? I do really love the pattern. And I ended up realizing that there were just a couple flaws or missteps on my part when I made the pattern that made me want to use the yarn for something else and made me want to reknit the spiral cardigan in a different yarn. So the spiral sweater is by Regina Weiss, and I want to reknit or re-crochet it, remake it in a different yarn, as like I've talked about before. I've told you that I want to remake it in a drapier, more worsted spun kind of yarn. So I'm thinking like just a straight up like superwash merino kind of yarn that I want to use for that. And it calls for it calls for an Aran weight. And originally I made it in this Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, which is their woolen spun worsted weight yarn. This is the Long John's colorway. Now, I had talked about before that I made it a little too small. I crocheted the smallest size. With this yarn, which is a lighter weight than the pattern called for, I should have gone up to the second smallest size. The biggest issue being that the back was a little too narrow. So my armholes were a little tight. And that always bugged me a little bit, but I was, for the most part, fine with just kind of being fine with it. But the last straw was when I popped a stitch. I popped this, and this is Brooklyn Tweed again, so it's considered to be kind of fragile, and it held up fine in crochet, which was kind of surprising to me too for a while and it was just because my armholes were too tight and I was stretching it too much across the back and there just wasn't enough give. And I finally eventually popped one of the strands of the yarn in the stitch, like right about here. And so I had a big hole right there. And I kind of ignored it. I had it when I wore it on the podcast last and I didn't talk about it because I was in denial. And I was like, it'll be fine. It's like it's woolen spun yarn. It's just gonna sit there and not go anywhere. And that, while that was the case, the hole was fine and it never got any bigger. I finally just was like, this is dumb. I'm just gonna rip it out, use the yarn for something else. For when I have this hole, they're probably not gonna mend because it's a really open crochet stitch. So I didn't quite know how to mend it, and it just wasn't worth it to me anyway because I had issues with the sweater anyway. So I ripped it out. I do want to make it again. I really, really hope I actually do it. And I got most of my yarn back. So this yarn also ripped out surprisingly well. This, like I said, people consider this yarn to be pretty fragile. It's woolen spun. It's definitely more aggressively plied than the quarry is, but it's still really fragile. And the only part that I had trouble with was my picot bind off. The whole circle is bound off with a picot edge, and that ripped a couple times. So I have these teeny little balls from that. But the rest of it, as long as I like did it in like just the right direction, it ripped out really nicely. So this is what I have, and it amounts to, gee whiz, 650 grams. I also never used my last skein of it. I got this also at my local yarn shop called Yarn. And this was part of their yarn exchange program with my local yarn shop. You can essentially sell them or trade them your old stash yarn and then get credit. And then they sell that used yarn. Well, not used yarn, but you know. They sell that yarn and then you can use your credit to buy that yarn. So I sold them a whole bunch of yarn when I first found out about that program to get rid of my stash because I don't love stashing, but I have a stash. And so I got 7 skeins of this, and this is the one that I never used. So where am I going here? I got 650 grams, so I essentially lost half a skein to frogging, and I'm going to show you why. This is, oh wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting my grammage wrong. I don't know how many grams I got. I do, it's written right here. I am all over the place. I got 315 grams, which amounts to 6.3 skeins, which amounts to 882 yards. So 6.5 skeins, it's just that the skeins are 50 grams, not 100. And this was all the fringe. So there was fringe along the whole bottom edge of that sweater, and I unpicked it all very gently. And so now I have 25 grams, which is a half a skein in cut up fringe, which is a bummer, but that's okay. So I'm going to hold on to this for now in case I desperately need it for something until I'm done making the next thing that I'm going to make with this yarn. And then I don't know, maybe I'll put it as fringe on my scarf. I don't know, but man, it's a bummer. Half a skein wasted to fringe that got ripped out. But so what I kind of decided I wanted to make with this yarn was the Ronan, which is another Andrea Mowry pattern, and it's a big, mostly stockinette cardigan with like that kind of batwing cocoon shape arm thing, which I've never made a sweater like that with that shape. It's like a really dropped like sleeve where the sleeve like body part comes all the way down here and then you just have a little tiny actual sleeve. So I'm a little scared of that shape of sweater, but I decided I wanted to make it and try it and see what I thought, and I think I'm gonna like it. I think I'm gonna like the Ronan. It calls for Brooklyn 2-week shelter, but I didn't have enough. For my size, which is gonna be the smallest size, it called for like 12 skeins, and I have almost 6.5 skeins here. So I checked out the old internet to see what I was going to have to buy. So ideally I would buy 6 more skeins. And that would have been a lot if I got it new, right? It's Brooklyn Tweed Shelter is like $12 or $13 a skein. So I would have been investing quite a bit for a half a sweater's worth of yarn for a new sweater, which is, you know, I'm a thrifty person, so it's a lot to me. So I went on the Ravelry D-Stash, as I do when I'm looking for a specific yarn, and I found somebody selling 5 skeins of it in this colorway, and I bought it. So she ended up charging me what ended up being a really good deal. She ended up charging me like $7 a skein plus like $5 in shipping. So I have done my little PayPal transaction to her. It hasn't shipped out yet, so hopefully soon it will be shipping out and I'll be getting the rest of the yarn I need to make the Ronan. So that's my current entry into the Finish It, Fix It, or Frog It make along. I frogged my spiral sweater and I am hopefully going to make the Ronan next. Now the only modification I do plan to do on the Ronan is to switch out some of the brioche for ribbing. So the Ronan is almost all stockinette on all like the body parts, and then it has a big shawl collar that is brioche, and then the sleeves, which only go from here to here because the rest of it is just part of the body, those are brioche as well. But to me the little sleeves just look way too bulky, and so I'm switching that to just a 1x1 ribbing. I'm going to keep the brioche on the collar because I really like how that looks, but I just think it looks a little funky on the sleeve and I'm not into it. So I'm going to change that to ribbing, which should save some yarn. So I might be playing a little bit of yarn chicken with this too. I have like a half a skein too little according to the pattern, but I'm fine playing that game. If I need an extra skein, I'll buy one more somewhere. I will find one more skein of long johns in shelter. I'm not too worried about dye lot color differences. That's just kind of not something that bothers me in general. Also, if they are really different, I will alternate skeins. Not a big deal. But if they're not that different, I'm not alternating skeins. So that's where I'm at with this make along. I am super inspired. I'm like, I am ripping things out left and right. I have, yeah, I've ripped things out. I don't know if I've actually finished any of my languishing lips, but we have a whole nother month now, so I'm excited. Okay, that is everything I have for you. Thank you so much for sitting with me this whole time and hearing me talk about all my stuff, because it was kind of a lot of stuff, right? Yeah. Okay. I hope you're doing well. I hope your winter / summer maybe is going really well. It's February. I have the day off of work coming up on Monday. I'm pretty excited. And Lucy's going to be at her grandparents' house that day, so I like really have a day off. I'm stoked. It's not like I can go do anything. It's the day after Valentine's Day. I'm not a huge Valentine's Day person anyway. I've talked about this before. I'm not huge on holidays except for like seasonal and lunar milestones throughout the year. So I probably won't do anything on Valentine's Day, but it'll be fun having the day off the next day. What are you doing? You doing anything for Valentine's Day? I know you can't really do much right now, but are you? Are you making a really fancy dinner at home for you and your partner? That would be amazing. Maybe we'll do that. I don't know. Probably not. Probably have pizza. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave you there. That is everything I have to talk about. It is Friday, and I'm excited that it's Friday, and I hope your Friday, or whatever day it is you're watching, is going so well. Thank you a whole super lot to my Patreon subscribers. You are amazing, and you are a huge part in keeping all of this going. So thank you. If you're interested in checking out the Patreon that I have for the YouTube channel, there's a link in the description box below. The big takeaway from it, if you want the pitch, is that you can sign up to get yarn sent to you for being a Patreon member, and you are entered into quarterly giveaways for being a Patreon member. So that's kind of fun. Okay. If you liked the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Have fun and stay awesome. Bye.